Captain Maria Rodriguez had dreamed of flying helicopters since she was 8 years old. Watching military aircraft soar over her small Texas hometown 20 years later, she stood on the tarmac at Fort Henderson, adjusting her flight helmet, and trying to ignore the whispers behind her back. "Can't believe they're letting a woman fly the Black Hawks," muttered Sergeant Tom Bradley, loud enough for everyone to hear. "This isn't some civilian joyride. Lives depend on these missions." Maria kept her eyes forward, her jaw set. She had graduated top of her class from flight school, earned her wings through sheer determination, and completed more training hours than most of her male counterparts. But here at Fort Henderson, none of that seemed to matter. Chief Warrant Officer Jake Morrison approached, his weathered face showing years of military service. At 52, he was the senior pilot and unofficial leader of the helicopter squadron. His reputation preceded him: 28 years of service, countless successful missions, and zero tolerance for what he called diversity experiments. "Rodriguez," Morrison said, his voice cold and professional, "you'll be flying with Lieutenant Davis today. Basic patrol mission. Think you can handle that without crashing into anything?" The other pilots snickered. Maria felt heat rise in her cheeks, but kept her voice steady. "Yes, sir. I'm ready for any mission you assign." "We'll see about that," Morrison replied, walking away with his signature swagger. Lieutenant Mark Davis, her co-pilot, seemed decent enough. Unlike the others, he didn't make jokes at her expense or question her abilities openly. But Maria could see the doubt in his eyes, the way he double-checked everything she did. The patrol mission went smoothly. Maria handled the Black Hawk with precision, navigating through the designated flight path while Davis monitored communications. For 2 hours, they flew over the desert terrain surrounding Fort Henderson, checking for any unusual activity along the border. "Nice flying," Davis admitted as they returned to base. "You handle her well." "Thanks," Maria replied, though she knew one compliment wouldn't change much. As they landed, Maria noticed Morrison and Bradley watching from the hangar. They weren't smiling. Over the next few weeks, Maria threw herself into every assignment. She volunteered for extra training, studied flight manuals until late at night, and maintained perfect performance records. But the harassment continued. Someone put sand in her locker. Her flight suit went missing twice. During briefings, Morrison would ask her questions designed to embarrass her, always with that same condescending tone. "Tell us, Rodriguez, what's the maximum payload capacity of the UH-60? He'd ask, even though it wasn't relevant to the mission. Maria always had the right answer, which seemed to irritate him even more. The breaking point came during a night training exercise. Maria was assigned to fly a rescue simulation, picking up wounded soldiers from a remote location. As she prepared for takeoff, Morrison approached with a clipboard. "Change of plans," he announced. "Bradley will take this mission. You'll observe from the ground." "Sir, I was briefed on this mission. I've prepared." "Are you questioning my orders, Captain?" Maria's hands clenched into fists. "No, sir." She watched from the sidelines as Bradley flew her mission, knowing she could have done it better. The injustice burned in her chest, but she swallowed her pride. She had to prove herself, and losing her temper wouldn't help. That night, Maria called her father back home in Texas. Miguel Rodriguez had served in Vietnam and understood military life better than anyone. "Mia," he said in his gentle voice, "some battles are won with patience, not anger. Keep doing your job. Truth has a way of coming to light." "But Papa, what if they never give me a real chance? What if I'm stuck doing patrol flights forever?" "Then you make those patrol flights perfect. You make them remember your name for the right reasons. Your grandmother always said, Los que dudan de ti, que te vean volar. Let those who doubt you watch you fly." Maria smiled for the first time in weeks. Her grandmother's words gave her strength. The next morning brought unexpected news. Colonel Patricia A.S., the base commander, had announced a special mission competition. Each pilot would be assigned a complex rescue scenario, and their performance would determine who got selected for an upcoming humanitarian mission in Central America. "This is it," Maria whispered to herself. "This is my chance." But Morrison had other plans. As the assignments were distributed, Maria noticed the skeptical looks from her fellow pilots. She had drawn the most challenging scenario, a medical evacuation from a remote mountain location during simulated bad weather conditions. "Tough break, Rodriguez," Bradley said with false sympathy. "That's a mission that's ended careers before." Maria studied her assignment carefully. The rescue point was located in difficult terrain, surrounded by peaks and unpredictable wind patterns. The weather simulation would include reduced visibility and strong crosswinds. Any pilot would find it challenging, But as she reviewed the technical specifications, something felt wrong. The helicopter assigned to her mission was Aircraft 247, an older Black Hawk that had been in maintenance recently. The maintenance logs showed several repairs, but everything appeared to be in order. Still, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She decided to inspect the aircraft personally before the mission. That evening she made her way to the hangar. The base was quiet, with only security personnel making their rounds. Maria used her access card to enter the maintenance area where Aircraft 247 was stored, using a flashlight. She began a thorough inspection of the helicopter. Everything looked normal at first glance. The rotor blades were secure, the engine compartments were properly sealed, and all external systems appeared functional. Then she noticed something strange. Fresh scratches around one of the hydraulic line connections. They were subtle, almost invisible unless you knew what to look for. Maria's heart sank as she realized what this might mean. Someone had been tampering with her aircraft. She wanted to report it immediately, but she had no proof beyond her suspicions. Who would believe her? Morrison and Bradley already thought she was looking for excuses to avoid difficult missions. Without concrete evidence, any accusation would look like paranoia. Maria made a decision that would change everything. She would fly the mission anyway, but she would be prepared for whatever sabotage awaited her. She spent the rest of the night studying emergency procedures, reviewing every possible scenario that could result from hydraulic failure. If someone wanted to see her fail, they were about to learn what real courage looked like. The morning of the mission competition arrived with clear skies and nervous energy throughout Fort Henderson. Maria had barely slept, spending hours reviewing emergency procedures and hydraulic system failures. She arrived at the briefing room early, determined to project confidence despite the knot in her stomach. Colonel Hayes stood at the front of the room, her silver hair pulled back in a tight bun and her uniform crisp with decades of earned decorations. Ladies and gentlemen, today's exercises will determine our selection for Operation Helping Hand, a critical humanitarian mission providing medical supplies to earthquake victims in Guatemala. The pilots selected will represent not just this base, but the finest traditions of military aviation. Maria felt all eyes on her as the colonel continued. Each scenario has been designed to test your skills under pressure. Weather conditions, difficult terrain, and time constraints will challenge even our most experienced pilots. Morrison raised his hand. Ma'am, given the nature of the Central America mission, shouldn't we prioritize pilots with extensive combat experience? Some of our newer personnel might not be ready for such responsibility. The implication was clear. Maria's jaw tightened, but she kept her expression neutral. Chief Morrison, I've reviewed all personnel files thoroughly. Each pilot participating today has met the qualifications. Skills and performance will determine the selection, nothing else. Bradley leaned over to whisper something to Morrison, both men glancing in Maria's direction. She caught fragments, mountain rescue, impossible conditions, career-ending, Lieutenant Davis, sitting nearby, gave Maria an encouraging nod. Over the past few weeks, he had become her only ally in the squadron, though he was careful not to show it openly. Rodriguez, Colonel Hayes called out, your mission parameters, medical evacuation from grid reference 247 Alpha, simulated patient with critical injuries requiring immediate transport to Fort Henderson Medical. Weather conditions include 15-knot crosswinds, visibility reduced to 2 miles, and turbulence warnings throughout the mountain corridor. Maria studied the briefing packet. Grid reference 247 Alpha was notorious among pilots, a narrow landing zone surrounded by jagged peaks, accessible only through a winding canyon with unpredictable wind shears. In perfect conditions, it was challenging. With the simulated weather, it bordered on impossible. Any questions? Captain Morrison asked with a thin smile. No, sir. I'm ready. Good. You'll be flying Aircraft 247. Pre-flight inspection begins in 30 minutes. As the briefing ended, Maria noticed Morrison and Bradley exchange a meaningful look. Her suspicions from the previous night intensified. Aircraft 247, the same helicopter she had found with suspicious scratches around the hydraulic lines. In the locker room, she changed into her flight suit with methodical precision. Each piece of equipment was checked and rechecked. If her aircraft had been sabotaged, she needed to be prepared for any emergency. Davis approached as she gathered her gear. Maria, I wanted to wish you luck. I know this mission is tough, but you're the best pilot I've flown with. Thanks, Mark. That means a lot. He hesitated, glancing around to make sure they weren't overheard. Listen, I probably shouldn't say this, but be extra careful out there. I overheard Morrison and Bradley talking last night about teaching, lessons and proving points. I don't know what they meant, but something didn't feel right. Maria's blood ran cold. Did they say anything specific? No, but Morrison kept mentioning how some pilots need to learn their limitations the hard way. Just ... Watch your back. Okay, I will. Thanks for the warning. As Maria walked toward the flight line, she felt the weight of dozens of eyes watching her. Other pilots, ground crew, even off-duty personnel had gathered to witness what many clearly expected to be her failure. The pressure was immense, but it also fueled her determination. Aircraft 247 sat on the tarmac like a sleeping giant. The Black Hawk helicopter, with its distinctive four-blade rotor system and powerful twin engines, was a marvel of military engineering. Under normal circumstances, Maria loved flying these machines. Today she approached with cautious respect and growing suspicion. Her pre-flight inspection was more thorough than usual. She checked every system twice, paying special attention to the hydraulic lines she had examined the night before. Everything appeared normal, but the scratches were still there, subtle evidence of recent tampering. Chief Maintenance Sergeant Robert Walsh supervised the inspection, a 20-year veteran with grease permanently embedded under his fingernails. Walsh took pride in keeping the squadron's aircraft in perfect condition. "She's in good shape, Captain," Walsh reported. "Fresh maintenance yesterday. All systems green." "Who performed the maintenance, Sergeant?" Walsh consulted his clipboard. "Bradley and Morrison worked on her hydraulics. Routine service, nothing major." Maria's heart sank. Morrison and Bradley had direct access to her aircraft just one day before the mission. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but she still had no concrete proof of sabotage. "Did they report any problems during maintenance?" "No, ma'am. Everything checked out perfectly." As Maria completed her inspection, she noticed Morrison watching from the hangar entrance. When their eyes met, he smiled and gave her a mock salute. The gesture sent chills down her spine. "Time to prove what you're made of, Rodriguez," Morrison called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Hope you're ready for some real flying." The gathered crowd murmured with anticipation. Maria realized this had become more than just a mission selection, it was public theater. With her as the main attraction, she climbed into the pilot's seat and began her systems check. Everything appeared normal on the instrument panel. Engine temperatures were good, fuel levels adequate, and all warning lights remained dark. For a moment, she wondered if she was being paranoid. Maybe Morrison and Bradley were just hoping that difficult mission conditions would cause her to fail naturally. But as she started the engines, a subtle vibration through the flight controls reminded her that something wasn't right. The helicopter was airworthy, but there was definitely something wrong with the hydraulic system. Not enough to ground the aircraft, but sufficient to create problems during demanding flight conditions. Her radio crackled to life. "Tower to Blackbird 7, you are cleared for takeoff. Weather update: winds increasing to 20 knots, gusts to 5, visibility dropping to 1.5 miles in the mountain corridor." The conditions were getting worse, exactly as Morrison had probably hoped. "Copy. Tower, Blackbird 7 departing for grid reference 247 Alpha." As Maria lifted off, she felt the subtle wrongness in the controls intensify. The helicopter wanted to drift left, requiring constant correction. Under normal circumstances, this would be manageable. But heading into difficult terrain with reduced visibility, even small control problems could become deadly. She keyed her radio one final time before entering the mountain corridor. "This is Captain Rodriguez in Blackbird 7. Beginning approach to grid, reference 247 Alpha." Down on the flight line, Morrison and Bradley watched her helicopter disappear into the haze. Morrison glanced at his watch and smiled. "How long do you think before she calls for help?" Bradley asked quietly. "Oh, she won't call for help," Morrison replied. "Pride will keep her flying until she has no choice but to make an emergency landing. And when she does, everyone will see that women don't belong in military aviation." They had no idea they were about to witness something that would end their careers and change Fort Henderson forever. Maria felt the mountain winds buffet her helicopter as she entered the canyon, approached to grid reference 247 Alpha. The Black Hawk shuddered with each gust, and the subtle hydraulic problem she had suspected was becoming more pronounced. What should have been minor corrections were requiring significant control input. "Blackbird 7 to tower," she reported, keeping her voice steady despite the growing concern. "Entering mountain corridor, visibility down to 1 mile and deteriorating." "Copy, Blackbird 7. Weather station reports winds gusting to 30 knots in your area. Do you wish to abort? Maria knew that Morrison and Bradley would be listening to every radio transmission. Aborting the mission would be seen as proof that she couldn't handle pressure, but continuing with compromised controls was becoming increasingly dangerous. Negative tower, continuing to target. As she maneuvered through the narrow canyon, the helicopter's response grew more sluggish. The left hydraulic system was definitely compromised, making every turn a struggle. Maria had to use both hands on the controls, fighting to keep the aircraft stable in the turbulent mountain air. Through her headset, she could hear radio chatter from the base. Other pilots were monitoring her progress, and she caught fragments of commentary that weren't particularly encouraging. She's fighting those controls pretty hard, someone observed. Winds must be brutal up there, another voice added, but Maria detected something else in the background conversation's anticipation. People were expecting her to fail, and some seemed to be looking forward to it. The GPS showed she was approaching the target coordinates. Through the haze and swirling mountain air, Maria could see the landing zone, a small cleared area surrounded by rocky outcroppings and steep terrain. Under perfect conditions, it would be a challenging landing. With her current control problems, it looked nearly impossible. She keyed her radio to contact the ground team waiting with the simulated patient. Ground team, this is Blackbird 7 approaching from the south, requesting wind conditions at the LZ. Blackbird 7, winds are variable, 15 to 25 knots, rocky terrain on all sides. You have about 50 feet of clearance for rotor wash. Maria took a deep breath and began her approach. The helicopter bucked and fought her every command. The hydraulic problem was getting worse. She could feel fluid pressure dropping through her flight controls. What had been subtle sabotage was becoming a genuine emergency. As she descended toward the landing zone, a sudden crosswind caught the aircraft. With compromised hydraulics, Maria couldn't compensate quickly enough. The helicopter drifted toward a rocky outcropping, rotor blades spinning dangerously close to the cliff face. "Come on," she muttered through gritted teeth, pulling full power and applying maximum control input. The Black Hawk responded sluggishly, climbing away from the rocks. With mere feet to spare, her radio crackled with concerned voices from the base. "Blackbird 7, are you experiencing mechanical problems?" Morrison's voice cut through the chatter, false concern evident in his tone. "Rodriguez, if you're having difficulties, now would be the time to abort. No shame in recognizing your limitations." Maria almost laughed at the transparent manipulation. Morrison wanted her to quit, to prove his point about women in combat aviation, but giving up now would validate every doubt, every snide comment, every moment of harassment she had endured. Tower Blackbird 7 is continuing the mission. She circled the landing zone again, studying the terrain and wind patterns. The hydraulic situation was deteriorating rapidly. She could see warning lights beginning to flicker on her instrument panel. Soon, she would lose primary flight controls entirely. But Maria had spent countless hours studying emergency procedures. She knew this helicopter better than Morrison realized. Even with hydraulic failure, the Black Hawk had backup systems, manual flight controls that required enormous physical strength but could still be used by a skilled pilot. "Ground team, prepare for immediate extraction. I'm coming in hot." This time, Maria approached the landing zone with determination rather than caution. She used the helicopter's momentum and power to overcome the control difficulties, accepting that this would be a hard landing but confident she could keep it controlled. As she descended, the hydraulic system finally failed completely. Warning, alarms filled the cockpit, and the flight controls became incredibly heavy. Maria felt her arms burning with effort as she fought to control the aircraft's descent. The ground rushed up to meet her. Maria flared the helicopter at the last second, using every technique she had learned in flight school. The Black Hawk touched down hard, bouncing once before settling firmly on the rocky ground. For a moment, she sat in the cockpit, hands shaking. From adrenaline and exhaustion, she had done it, landed safely despite the sabotaged hydraulics. The ground team was already approaching with their simulated casualty. "Blackbird 7 to tower," she reported, trying to keep the triumph out of her voice. "Successful landing at grid reference 247 Alpha, beginning patient loading." The response from base was immediate and surprised. "Copy, Blackbird 7, good work." As the ground team secured the mock patient in her aircraft, Maria assessed her situation. The hydraulic failure meant she couldn't take off normally, but Black Hawks were designed with multiple backup systems for exactly this kind of emergency. She could fly home on manual controls and backup hydraulics. Though it would require incredible physical effort and perfect technique, Most pilots would call for a recovery team rather than attempt such a dangerous flight, but Maria wasn't most pilots. Tower, be advised, I have complete hydraulic failure. Attempting return flight on backup systems. The radio fell silent for several seconds. Then Colonel Hayes' voice came through, clear and concerned. Blackbird 7, recommend you wait for recovery team. No need to risk, ma'am. Aircraft is flyable on backup systems. Patient requires immediate medical attention. I'm returning to base. What Maria didn't say was that she had realized this was her moment. Morrison and Bradley had sabotaged her helicopter, expecting her to fail publicly. Instead, she was going to demonstrate skills that few pilots possessed, bringing home a damaged aircraft through some of the most challenging flying conditions imaginable. That she started the engines and felt the massive effort required just to lift off. Without hydraulic assistance, every control input required tremendous strength. Her arms were already aching, and she had 20 minutes of mountain flying ahead of her. As Blackbird 7 rose from the landing zone, Maria Rodriguez began the most important flight of her career. Back at Fort Henderson, Morrison and Bradley were about to learn that their plan had backfired in the worst possible way. 20 minutes from Fort Henderson, Maria Rodriguez was fighting for her life. The Black Hawk helicopter bucked and fought her like an angry bull as she navigated through the mountain corridor with no hydraulic assistance. Every muscle in her arms screamed with effort, and sweat dripped into her eyes despite the cool mountain air. The backup hydraulic system had lasted exactly 8 minutes after takeoff before failing completely. Now she was flying on pure manual control, something most pilots trained for but hoped never to experience. The control stick felt like it weighed 50 pounds, requiring both hands just to make basic adjustments. Tower, Blackbird 7, she radioed, trying to keep her breathing steady. I've lost backup hydraulics. Flying on manual controls only. Estimated arrival in 15 minutes. The response was immediate and tense. Colonel Hayes' voice came through clearly. Blackbird 7, are you declaring an emergency? Affirmative. Full emergency landing procedures requested. Back at Fort Henderson, the base had erupted into controlled chaos. Fire trucks and ambulances were moving into position along the runway. In the control tower, Morrison and Bradley exchanged worried glances as they listened to the radio traffic. She should have called for rescue, Bradley muttered nervously. No way she can bring that bird home on manual controls. Morrison's face was pale. Their plan had been simple: create hydraulic problems that would force Rodriguez to make an emergency landing at the remote site, requiring rescue and proving she couldn't handle pressure situations. They never expected her to attempt flying home with complete system failure. If she crashes, ... double quotes, Morrison began, then stopped. The implications were clear. If Maria died because of their sabotage, they would face court-martial and prison time. In the helicopter, Maria was discovering reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed. Her flight training had included emergency procedures, but nothing had prepared her for the physical demands of controlling a 10,000-pound aircraft with arm strength alone. The terrain below was unforgiving, rocky desert punctuated by steep canyons and mesas. If she lost control here, there would be no survivors. But giving up wasn't an option, not with a patient depending on her, and certainly not with Morrison and Bradley expecting her to fail. Blackbird 7, this is Colonel Hayes. What's your current situation? Maria took a deep breath before responding. Ma'am, aircraft is controllable but requires maximum effort. Patient stable. I can make it home. Through her headset, she could hear increased radio chatter from other aircraft. Several helicopters had launched to provide assistance if needed, and she could see 2 Black Hawks paralleling her course at a safe distance. Lieutenant Davis' voice came through on the tactical frequency. Maria, I'm in Blackbird 3, flying escort. You're looking good from here. Just keep her steady. The encouragement helped, but Maria was beginning to worry about her physical stamina. Her arms were cramping, and maintaining precise control was becoming increasingly difficult. She still had 10 minutes to go, and the approach to Fort Henderson would require delicate maneuvering. As she cleared the final mountain ridge, Fort Henderson spread out before her. The runway was lined with emergency vehicles, their red and blue lights creating a colorful display against the desert landscape. Maria could see crowds of personnel gathered to witness her landing, some probably hoping for success, others perhaps expecting disaster. Tower, Blackbird 7 has the field in sight. Requesting straighten approach to runway 27, Blackbird 7, you're cleared for emergency approach. Winds.com, visibility unlimited. Emergency crews standing by. This was the moment Maria had been working toward her entire career, not just landing safely, but proving that skill and determination mattered more than prejudice and sabotage. She began her final approach with grim determination. The helicopter wanted to drift left, then right, as crosswinds caught the fuselage. Without hydraulic assistance, Maria had to anticipate every wind shift and apply massive control inputs to maintain her flight path. Her arms felt like they were on fire, but she gritted her teeth and held course. Looking good. Blackbird 7, the tower controller encouraged. You're on glide path. 2 miles out, Maria could see individual faces. In the crowd now, Morrison and Bradley stood near the operations building, their expressions unreadable from this distance. Colonel Hayes was positioned near the runway with the senior staff, all of them watching intently. 1 mile out, the helicopter was stable but required constant correction. Maria's hands were cramping so badly she had trouble maintaining her grip on the controls. She flexed her fingers quickly, trying to restore circulation. Half-mile out, Blackbird 7, you're doing great. The runway approached rapidly. Maria began her flare, pulling back on the controls to slow her descent. The effort required was enormous. She felt muscles in her back and shoulders joining the protest from her arms. That at 50 feet above the ground, disaster nearly struck. A sudden crosswind caught the helicopter, pushing it toward the edge of the runway. With normal hydraulics, this would have been a minor correction. With manual controls, Maria had to use every ounce of strength to bring the aircraft back on centerline. The crowd gasped as they watched the Black Hawk drift sideways, then straighten out with apparent superhuman effort from the pilot. Maria didn't hear their reaction. She was focused entirely on the landing, drawing on training, instinct, and pure determination. 20 feet, 10 feet. The helicopter's wheels touched the runway with barely a bounce. Maria had done it, completed one of the most challenging emergency landings in military aviation history. As the rotors wound down, emergency crews surrounded the aircraft. Medical personnel quickly extracted the simulated patient while fire trucks stood by as a precaution. Maria sat in the cockpit for a moment, hands shaking from exhaustion and adrenaline. She had proven herself in the most dramatic way possible. But as she climbed down from the helicopter, she realized this was only the beginning. The sabotage would have to be investigated, and the truth would finally come to light. Colonel Hayes approached with a mixture of admiration and concern. Outstanding flying, Captain. I've never seen anything like that. Thank you, ma'am. But we need to talk about why those hydraulics failed. Morrison and Bradley were walking toward them, their faces carefully composed masks of false concern. They had no idea that their careers were about to end in the most public way possible. The real reckoning was about to begin. The investigation began within hours of Maria's emergency landing. Colonel Hayes had ordered a complete forensic examination of aircraft 246, and what the maintenance team discovered sent shockwaves through Fort Henderson. Chief Maintenance Sergeant Walsh found the evidence first: subtle but deliberate damage to the primary hydraulic lines. The connections had been partially loosened, designed to fail gradually under the stress of demanding flight conditions. It was sophisticated sabotage that required detailed knowledge of helicopter systems, ma'am, Walsh reported to Colonel Hayes. In her office that evening, this wasn't mechanical failure. Someone with significant technical expertise deliberately compromised those hydraulic lines. Colonel Hayes studied the maintenance photographs with growing anger. As a pilot herself, she understood exactly how close Maria had come to dying, who had access to that aircraft. According to the logs, Chief Morrison and Sergeant Bradley performed routine maintenance on the hydraulic system just yesterday. The pieces fell into place immediately. Hayes remembered Morrison's comments during the mission briefing, his obvious hostility toward Maria, and his surprised reaction when she successfully completed the emergency landing. Sergeant Walsh, I want this investigation sealed until we have all the facts. Not a word to anyone outside this room. The next morning brought a surprise inspection of the entire helicopter maintenance facility. Colonel Hayes arrived with 2 military police investigators and a forensics expert from the Army Criminal Investigation Division. Morrison and Bradley were caught completely off guard. They had expected the investigation to focus on mechanical failure, perhaps pilot error, anything except deliberate sabotage. When MP investigators confiscated their toolboxes and demanded detailed statements about their maintenance activities, both men realized their plan had unraveled. Bradley cracked first under questioning. The younger sergeant had never imagined he would be facing potential murder charges for what had started as harassment. When investigators showed him the forensic evidence, his fingerprints on the damaged hydraulic fittings, tool marks that matched his equipment, he broke down completely. It wasn't supposed to be dangerous, he confessed to the investigators. Morrison said we were just going to create minor hydraulic problems, make her abort the mission and look incompetent. We never wanted her to get hurt. Morrison tried to maintain his innocence longer, claiming the hydraulic damage was coincidental, but faced with Bradley's confession and overwhelming forensic evidence, his story collapsed. The man who had tormented Maria for weeks finally revealed the depth of his prejudice. Women don't belong in military aviation, he told the investigators with bitter defiance. I've seen what happens when political correctness overrides common sense. Rodriguez might be a decent pilot, but she doesn't have the physical strength or emotional stability for combat situations. So you decided to sabotage her aircraft to prove your point. I decided to give her a reality check. She was supposed to have minor control problems, maybe make a hard landing at the remote site. It would have ended her flight status without anyone getting seriously hurt. The investigator stared at Morrison with disgust. Chief, you nearly killed a fellow officer because of your personal prejudices. Captain Rodriguez could have died attempting to fly home with the damage you caused. As word of the investigation spread through Fort Henderson, the entire base was stunned. Maria had not only survived deliberate sabotage, but had performed one of the most skillful emergency landings in recent military history. The formal hearing took place 1 week later. Maria sat in the witness chair, wearing her dress uniform with newly awarded ribbons, recognizing her exceptional airmanship. She testified calmly about the harassment she had endured, the suspicious maintenance issues, and her decision to continue the mission despite obvious sabotage. Why didn't you abort when you realized there were control problems? The prosecutor asked. Sir, I knew that Morrison and Bradley were expecting me to fail. Aborting the mission would have been seen as proof that women can't handle pressure. I had to prove them wrong. Even at the risk of your own life. Maria considered the question carefully. Every military pilot accepts risk as part of the job, but I won't accept being sabotaged by my own colleagues because of their prejudices. When Morrison took the stand in his own defense, he showed no remorse. I stand by my actions. Rodriguez got lucky, but luck doesn't qualify someone for combat aviation. The next time, she might not be so fortunate, and her failures could cost other lives. Colonel Hayes had heard enough. Chief Morrison, in 28 years of military service, you've forgotten the most basic principle of military honor. We protect each other, regardless of gender, race, or any other difference. You've disgraced your uniform and betrayed the trust of every pilot under your command. The verdicts were swift and decisive. Morrison was court-martialed for attempted murder, conspiracy, and conduct unbecoming an officer. He received a dishonorable discharge and 8 years in military prison. Bradley, because of his cooperation and lesser role, was sentenced to 4 years and a bad conduct discharge. But the real vindication came 3 days after the hearing. Colonel Hayes called Maria into her office for a private meeting. Captain Rodriguez, I have some news. Your performance during the sabotage incident has attracted attention at the highest levels. The Pentagon has specifically requested you for Operation Helping Hand in Guatemala. Maria felt her heart soar. Ma'am, I'm honored. There's more. You've also been selected for advanced flight training with the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. They're looking for pilots with exceptional skills under pressure, and your recent performance has made you their top candidate. The 160th SOA are the legendary Night Stalkers. It was the most elite helicopter unit in the military, and they wanted her. 6 months later, Maria stood on a different tarmac, this time wearing the distinctive unit patch of the Night Stalkers. Her new assignment had brought challenges and opportunities beyond her wildest dreams. She was flying the most advanced helicopters in the military, supporting the most critical special operations missions around the world. Lieutenant Davis, who had been promoted and transferred to her new unit, approached with a smile. Ready for tonight's mission, Captain? Always ready, Maria replied, checking her equipment with the same methodical precision she had learned at Fort Henderson. As she climbed into her new aircraft, a highly modified Black Hawk equipped with the latest technology, Maria thought about the journey that had brought her here. Morrison's sabotage had been intended to end her career. Instead, it had launched her into military aviation's most elite ranks. Her radio crackled with mission updates from around the world. Night Stalker helicopters were preparing for operations on 3 continents, carrying some of America's finest warriors into situations where failure was not an option. Nightbird 6, this is Command. You're cleared for takeoff. Copy, Command. Nightbird 6, departing. As Maria lifted off into the darkness, she smiled at the thought of Morrison watching from his prison cell as news Reports celebrated another successful Night Stalker mission. He had tried to destroy her career because he couldn't accept change. Instead, he had helped create one of the military's finest pilots. The helicopter disappeared into the night sky, carrying Captain Maria Rodriguez toward her next challenge. Behind her, she left a legacy that would inspire a new generation of female aviators, proving that skill, courage, and determination would always triumph over prejudice and sabotage. In the end, justice hadn't just been served, it had soared.